Thank you for joining us for part 1 of the series, Judgment Call, where Jeremy discusses what the Bible really says about judging others. If you have any questions about this message or about Crosswind Church, please visit our website at www.crosswindchurch.net or email us at info@crosswindchurch.net.
Grab a seat, grab your Bibles. We're going to be in the Gospel of Matthew today, chapter 7. Today we begin a brand new series entitled Judgment Call. And I'll tell you a little bit about this. The whole point of the series over the month of January is just to take a hard look at what the Bible actually has to say about judging others. And so we will spend some time doing that. Before we go any farther, however, I need to just do one kind of business-keeping thing. In fact, we'll talk about this as the weeks go on. Every week we'll talk about this. Before we go any farther, when I said judging others, immediately you all had something probably popped in your head, some kind of definition of judging, definition of judgment, what that looks like, what your ideas are. And so just so that we're all on the same page, all talking about the same thing, what I've done is I've come up with just a little definition that we're going to use for the duration of the series to define judgment. And Jessica, I think we have it to go up on screen. It's this. Judgment is any time you formulate an opinion about someone based on a standard. All right, I'm going to explain that in just a minute. Keep it up on screen. Anytime you formulate an opinion about someone based upon a standard. Now, those standards could be things that you came up with on your own. Okay? Standards of the way that you discipline your children, or the way when you put your kids in bed, or whatever it is, there's that standard you come up with. And when you see another parent or somebody else that does it differently than you, immediately you formulate an opinion about them. Hey, I like the way they do that. I don't like the way they do that. Whatever that is, you've made the standard, and you're comparing them to the standard that you've come up with. That's a judgment. The other way, the standard doesn't have to be from internal. The standard could also be external. So it could be created by, like, say, the government. So, for instance, the law says that if you're driving a certain amount of over the speed limit, that's reckless driving, right? That's a standard that they have set for you. And when you look at someone and formulate an opinion about them, like so many people do, me, you must be a bad driver, whatever that is. That is a standard set up by the government. And there's even a standard that can be set up by some kind of moral code. For Christians, we follow the Bible. If you're a Muslim, it could be the Quran. If you are Buddha, it could be teaching a Buddhist, it could be teaching a Buddha, whatever that is. There's maybe a moral standard or religious standard that's set up for you. And when someone either follows that or doesn't follow that or exceeds that or doesn't keep up to that expectation, we formulate an opinion. So anytime we formulate an opinion about someone based upon a standard either that we come up with or someone else has come up with, that's going to be kind of our definition of judging. And we'll keep returning back to that just so we all are on the same playing field before we get started. Now, this is an important topic for us to kind of begin to kind of talk about, because especially in the society in which we live in today, but really the society for millennia now, this idea of judging others and passing judgment on others has been something that's come up over and over and over and over again. And in fact, it's something that I think is particularly relevant and particularly seen, if you will, at Christmas time. Think about that for just a minute. Over Christmas, you see people that you don't normally see. Family members come and visit you. You go visit family members. You go see friends. You stay in their house. They stay in your house. And I thought about just saying, and everyone does this, but I'm going to stop and just kind of go, Jeremy does this, okay? You may know what I'm talking about. Like, as soon as you leave their house, as soon as someone leaves your house, there's a conversation. It may go on internally. It may go on with your spouse. It may go on with the kid, where you kind of go, you say some things like this. You go, did you see the way they discipline their kid? I can't believe that they would do it that way, right? I tell you what, if I were their parent, I would. Fill in the blank, right? Or you do this. You know what? I can't believe she didn't even think enough of us to clean her house before I came over. Can you believe that? Right? Or maybe you say something like, I can't believe that they spent that much money on that car. Or that they're wasting all of that money on that house. Or they did a renovation. Do you know how much they said it cost? Oh my goodness, I can't believe, right? Maybe you don't do that, right? But I think at Christmas time that's particularly seen in the fact that there's some kind of standard, typically one that we've come up with, and then we compare everyone to and formulate opinions based on that standard. In fact, I just come to this idea that everybody in my family, except for me, is crazy. Have you been there? Because here's the thing, You talk about everybody else in your family being crazy, but what you forget is that when you leave, they talk about how crazy you are. Right? And if there's nobody in your family that's crazy, it's you. Right? You with me? And so at Christmas time, we particularly kind of have this kind of leaning into this idea of kind of judging. And if you don't judge other people at Christmas, if that is something you struggle with, then inevitably you know what it's like to be judged by someone else, don't you? I mean, come on. Okay, so I have a daughter who shall go nameless, who is completely sold out, who loves a particular series of children's books written about a wizard that goes to a magical school and all that kind of stuff. And so for Christmas, she got some stuff from Hogwarts and Gryffindor and hats and stars and all kinds of stuff like that. And a couple days after Christmas, we were going somewhere. I don't even remember where we were going. And she comes down and she's got her stuff on. And no one looked at her funny. No one said anything to her. But these were her words. I absolutely love it. She went, "I'm obsessed. Don't judge me." those were her words that came out of her mouth. And my first reaction was, no one's judging you. But the point is that inside of her, she felt that, right? She felt that there might be someone looking at me. There might be someone formulating an opinion about me. She kind of understood that. And you get it, because whether or not you want to fully admit it or not, at Christmas time, you saw that person give you a look across the table. And you interpreted it a certain way. Or you heard that snide little comment, right? Or your mother-in-law said, "Hey, do you want me to go ahead and clean that because," right? And you all understood or felt what it's like to sit in the seat of someone that is judged. As Christians, here's where the problem comes. Like, I'm pretty certain we have a moral standard that we're called to live up to. And I'm pretty certain the Bible says somewhere in there, don't judge and all that. How exactly does that work? And how exactly does that fit? Because I know that I'm called to hold people accountable to living a godly life, but at the same time, this constant kind of passing judgment on one another. How does it work? How is it supposed to work? And if you're a Christian, what you felt in society is that tension. That tension between the people that get the tattoos that say only God can judge me. Right, which I'm going to get in big Gothic script right across my back, right? And at the same time, the tension that comes from what we've been called to live, godly life, we should hold each other accountable for that. And so that's what we're going to do in January, is we're just going to take a step very intentionally into that tension. And what I want us to do is I want us to not be influenced so much by our culture as we are by what the Bible has to say. I don't want us to be influenced even by our emotions so much as what the Bible has to say. And I'm going to do my best to keep us in line with what the Bible has to say as we teach through it, and not give you a whole bunch of my opinions, but instead try to tell you what it is that the Bible actually has to say. And so today we begin at the place we can always begin, and that's with the words of Jesus Christ there in Matthew chapter 7. And we're going to take a passage of Scripture that I think is often misquoted, misused, and misunderstood, and we're going to walk our way through it. Matthew chapter 7, beginning in verse 1. As you're turning there, Jesus has drawn a crowd to himself, as he often did. He's delivering the most famous sermon that he will ever deliver, and we call it the Sermon on the Mount. Maybe you've heard about it. He kind of goes up on the hillside and begins teaching, and Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7 record his teachings in the Sermon on the Mount. And right in the middle of that, he makes this statement. Look at verse 1. "Judge not, that you be not judged." There it is. There it is. Judge not, lest you not be judged. Let's close the books, pass the plates, and go to the house. Right? See, this is where a lot of people like to stop when they read. And the reason we like to stop it is because it makes it kind of nice and clean and neat. And because I don't have to feel bad when you tell me that I'm sinning, and I don't have to feel bad when you point out my shortcomings, and I don't have to feel bad when anyone, because I just say, hey, you know what? You're called not to judge me. Matthew chapter 7, verse 1, only God is my judge, and that is that. That's the end of all of it. The problem is that Jesus didn't end there. He didn't stop talking there. There's a few more verses where he's going to keep talking about judgment. Look at chapter 7, verse 2. For, he says, because, he gives us a reason why, which is phenomenal that Jesus does that, right? For, or because, with the same judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. So essentially what he's saying is this. When I was a little boy, my parents, I was so blessed to be raised in a Christian home. Even before my mother remarried and I was adopted, we went to church and was taught all this. And one of the things my mom did so well to try to teach me was this thing called the Golden Rule. Maybe you've heard about it. The Golden Rule, it essentially says that you should do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And it's a great little kind of phrase that you can teach your kids, right? Where it's, hey, would I like someone to come up and punch me in the nose? No, I wouldn't. Therefore, I probably ought not go up and punch someone in the nose. You with me? All right, that's the Golden Rule. What Jesus is saying here is he's not saying that judgment should never take place. He's not saying there's not a time to hold someone accountable. What he's saying is something incredibly, incredibly profound. He's saying this golden rule about doing unto others as you would have them do unto you needs to be applied to judging others. So we can even word it like this. Judge unto others, or judge others as you would have them judge you. Well, that changes things just a little bit, doesn't it? Doesn't it? Because here's what I know about you and about me. I know how I want to be judged. I know. It's pretty simple. In fact, I'm so naive. There's like this big flaw that I have inside of me that I'm convinced that if I can sit down and talk with you and fill the space up with enough words and explain it right, that you'll like me. Like, I'm convinced of it. I'm absolutely convinced that if you understood my circumstances, you would understand all of the things that kind of surround the way that I work. If you understood where I came from, you would understand why I am the way that I am. I'll even kind of explain it a little differently. When you pull out in front of someone in traffic, and they pull up behind you, and they wave at you with not all their fingers, and they honk their horn, and all that sort of thing, what's the first thing that you think? Or let me just tell you what the first thing I think is. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. If you knew the meeting I just came from, you'd understand my mind was in another place, right? If you knew the message that I just got, the phone call that I was on, right? Oh, I'm sorry, I was distracted. And if you knew I was distracted, then you would understand and you wouldn't judge me so harshly. You see, when people judge me, the way I want to be judged is I want them to take my entire life history into account. I want them to know about my upbringing and about my parents, and I want them to know about divorce and remarriage and stepbrothers and sisters, and I want them to know about blood diseases and all sorts of hospitalizations and surgeries and all of the bad things that have happened to me. I want them to take every bit of that into account when they judge me, because I'm convinced that if they know my history and if they know my circumstances and they know my context, they will judge me less harshly. What I want, put simply, I want people that would judge me. I want them to give me the benefit of the doubt. And what Jesus says here is this. You need to understand that the measure in which you judge, that same measure will come back to you. What goes around comes around. So you ought to judge. He doesn't say don't. You ought to judge in the way that you would want to be judged. Now, just pause for just a minute. Wrap your head around it. Just imagine how our society would look differently. If instead of rushing to judge, we paused and gave the benefit of the doubt. We chose to think the best about other people. Now, I just have a confession to make. And it's one of those things that just, especially this morning and last night, I'm lousy at this. I am absolutely pitiful at this. Because here's the thing. I'm convinced that I'm right. And even if I am right, when I judge too quickly and when I judge incorrectly, I lose the leverage that I might have to influence someone else's life. And I forfeit the opportunity to rescue them when they need to be rescued. I am lousy at this. This is why I'm so in need of God's grace and so thankful for God's grace, because so many times, too many times, I miss the boat on this. Jesus goes on to explain. He gives us an illustration about this. Look at verse 3. He says this, why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, where there is a log in your own I. Now, I love the first question that he asks. It's a simple one. Why? We could, I don't want to put words in Jesus' mouth, but let's see if I can kind of take it back to midway for some of you guys, right? And simplify it for you, okay? Here's the deal. Put it in the JIV, because I'm a simple kind of guy. I have to get that. Why do you care? It's a great question for us to ask, right? When we're tempted to pass judgment, when we're tempted to go and to formulate an opinion based upon a standard, the question we should ask is, why do you care? And inevitably, some of you are going to say this, well, I care because that sin, and sin angers God, and therefore that sin angers me. And I would go, man, praise God, but you have a lack of self-awareness. Right? Let's take a peek in and look at those emotions that you're really feeling when it is that you're tempted to pass judgment on other people. Let me put it this way. Is the emotion that you're feeling jealousy? I'll give you this one. I can't believe she wore that to church because I can't wear it to church. How about that? Right? I'll give you an example. I had a friend that I was mentoring, a student that I was mentoring a long time ago. And he came to meet with me on a regular basis once a week. And one particular week he came in and he was just railing on all of his classmates. You know, they go to these parties and they get drunk and they sleep with each other. And he just goes on and on and on and on and on and on. And I sit and I listen to him formulating an opinion based upon standard. Now, listen, he's absolutely right. Those are things that shouldn't be happening. But when we pause and take a look inward, the reason that he was really upset was not because that sin broke God's heart. He was upset because he wasn't doing it. He was upset because he wasn't invited to the party. You with me? That's the emotion that we have to deal with. Is it jealousy? We'll see if we can come up with some others. Is it envy? Is it envy? I can't believe that they would spend that much money on a house. Pause, because I don't have that much money to spend on a house. You with me? It's not because you're worried they're being a bad steward. It's because, well, let's just be honest, you don't have that type of money. How about this one? Could it be that their success or what it is that they're doing, could it be that it frightens you, or there's a fear, or that it drives some kind of sense of competition in you? Can I just be honest with you? Pastors are lousy at this one. Because we see the church down the street, or see the church in the next city over, or see the church across the United States, and we see them blowing and going, and people coming and getting baptized and getting saved. And as pastors, one of the first things that we say is, well, they must be an inch deep and a mile wide. I bet they're not even really teaching the gospel there. You know what? I watched one 2-minute clip of that pastor. It was his worst 2 minutes ever, and I saw that, and he never even once pulled his Bible out. Right? Could it be that it threatens you? Could it be that you're jealous? Could it be that you're envious? Could it be any other number of things? What we have got to learn to do is to recognize this simple truth. That when I'm tempted, or back up, when I see sin in the life of other people, it very well might be a reflection of sin that's in me. Let me stop just a minute, because that's a big statement. When I see sin in the life of other people, the first thing I need to do is recognize that may be a reflection of something in my own life. And when something about their sin angers me, it might just be that there's something about my sin that angers God. And what Jesus says here is this. Why? Why do you notice the speck, the teeny tiny speck? Why do you notice that little speck of sawdust in their eye? When meanwhile you've got all of this other stuff that's going on. To put it in the simplest terms, what Jesus says is this. When you're tempted to pass judgment, the first place you ought to look is not at other people, but take a look in the mirror. Because it's a lot easier to see sin in someone else's life than it is for me to recognize sin in my own. And there's just a gut check that has to take place before I make that statement, before I make that confrontation, before I write that blog, before I send that email, before I message that tweet, whatever it is. I need to recognize that what I see in them might very well be a reflection of me. Jesus says, man, why are you noticing them? There's things about you that you have got to take notice of. There's things about you that you have got to deal with. Now look what he says. Next, this is really neat. This is why we have to read all of the text. Verse 5. You hypocrite. I love that about Jesus, right? In this particular case, a hypocrite is someone who refuses to look in the mirror. A hypocrite is someone that's going to call it out in you, but deny it in myself. That's a hypocrite. You hypocrite. First. The reason I like that Matthew recorded Jesus' words here as first is because if there's a first, there's a what? Second. Stick with me. First, he says, take the log out of your own eye, and then, this is the second part, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. This is so important. Jesus doesn't deny the fact that a speck exists. Jesus doesn't deny the fact that there's a problem in their life, that there's sin there that has to be dealt with. He in no way glosses over the sin of other people. Instead, what he says is this. First, you've got to look in the mirror and get real gut-level honest about the sin that is in your own life. And then, and only then, will you actually be able to help someone who has a problem that's in their life. Now, this is where we miss the boat, because we like to stop in verse 1 and say, don't judge. And Jesus says, it's bigger than that. It's bigger than that. I'm not saying don't ever formulate an opinion. I'm not even saying don't ever pass judgment. We'll learn about that this week. What I'm saying is, man, you first got to take a look at yourself before you go take a look at them. Sometimes people will hear that and they'll make this statement. Well, but if I acknowledge my sin, then on what grounds do I have to go and talk to them about theirs? If I kind of go, well, I know I've got this problem and I've been dealing with it, but I still haven't been able to overcome it, and I don't really have any ground to stand on when I go and talk to them. Can I just tell you something? That's a myth. Because of the fact that you come to terms with and are wrestling with your own sin, it probably makes you the perfect person to go and talk to them about their sin. Simply because you've come to reckon with yours and you're wrestling with it, that makes you perfectly qualified to go and talk to them. This is something that other churches and other programming have kind of picked up on. In fact, right now in Union City, for women, there is a program called Celebrate Recovery. And Celebrate Recovery is a peer-to-peer counseling program right now. It's through the Bridge of Northwest Tennessee, so it's for women only. And the concept behind it is pretty simple. If you are an addict, or a wife of an addict, or a husband of an addict, and you need some support, and you need some counsel, and you need some help as you get through that addiction, as you get through those problems, as you get through whatever it is that you go with, that you can come to Celebrate Recovery, and guess who the counselors are? People who used to be addicts. People who are wrestling with their own struggles. The only difference is that they have come to realize this is a struggle, and I'm going to wrestle with it. This is a problem. There's sin in my life, and I'm going to wrestle with it. And because you are willing to go, here is my law that's in my eye. Here is my problem that I'm dealing with. And I'm going to work my tail off with God's help and whoever I counsel, whatever I need to do to remove that law. Now I become the perfect candidate to move in and talk with you about yours. Why? Because I've been where you are. I've felt what you felt. Seen a lot of the same things that you've seen. I really enjoy getting to make hospital visits as a pastor. Because in my life, I spent a lot of time in hospitals as a patient. And so because of that kind of perspective, having a lot of things done to me, I think that there's a small part of me that is able to empathize with what it's like to lay in that bed. What it's like to be told not to get up. What it's like to be poked and prodded and have needles stuck in me. And there's a part of me that can go, listen, I feel your pain. I don't know exactly what you're going through, but I've been where you've been, and let me pray for you from that perspective. And I think it makes a difference when you've been where they are. First, take a look at that log. Remove that log. And then, and only then, you'll become able take a peek into their lives. If we were to go and survey the millennials here in Union City, I bet that the statistics would be similar as they are nationwide. When we ask the millennials, which is people that were born roughly after 1978, up through the millennia or whatever. They're the newest wave of adults, if you will, that are kind of coming through. If you were going to ask them about the church, their perspective of the church, they would say a couple of things. This is across every study. They would say the church is hypocritical, which Jesus addresses. And they would say the church is judgmental, which Jesus addresses. And the issue is not that it's wrong for us to formulate an opinion. The issue is not that it's wrong for us to hold people to a moral standard. The issue is not for us to try to hold up the standard of God and live up to it. The issue is the fact that the church refuses, the church, capital C church, refuses to look in the mirror and deal with our own problems. Instead, we want to point outward and look at the problems of everyone else. Jesus says, we want you to do that as a church. We want you to be able to be a moral compass in our society. But before you can do that, first you have to recognize and acknowledge sin that is in your own life. It's easy for us to point out sexual sin in someone else when we're wrestling with it on our own, isn't it? It's easier for us to see illicit spending and uncontrolled debt in other people when our credit cards are maxed out ourselves. Jesus says, look, I'm not telling you not to judge. I'm just telling you there's a right way to do it. First, take a look at yourself. First, deal with yourself. Then you'll be clear to go and deal with other people. So where does that leave us? See, I'm convinced that we have a room this big, and even me up on stage, like, there's times, maybe even the last hour, that you've passed judgment on somebody. Because their sin maybe pushed a button in you. Or because their actions or lack of actions, it rubbed you the wrong way. And what you're really doing is you're seeing a reflection of what it is that's in your life. Maybe over the Christmas holidays, a lot of your life was reflected. You felt the need to point it out in everyone else's business. And I say today, would you be willing to begin that difficult process? Saying, okay, God, before I step out, before I say anything, before I do anything, before I try to deal with the speck in my brother-in-law's eye, before I try to deal with the speck in my neighbor's eye, before I try to deal with the speck in my wife's eye, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at a mirror and see what is it that is in them, or excuse me, what is it in me that makes me see so clearly what it is that's in them. Today, I wonder if you'd be willing just to kind of ask God to help you in that process and begin the repentance process. Begin the process of removing the law. I told you that last night and this morning were particularly hard for me as I look back over this message and prepare to come in today. I'm so quick. So quick to point the finger and go, but you. And the problem is that I've developed enough, at least somewhat of societal filter that I don't necessarily do it to you, to your face, or to anybody. I try to kind of filter it out because I'm a pastor and you're supposed to do this thing. The problem is, for me, just personally, I'm being complete confession here, it is that when I get home and the door gets shut, the filter comes down, and my wife and kids are normally the ones that I'm pointing at. They're normally the ones that I'm going, but you always, and you never. Why don't you just? And just blah, 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 blah. Just garbage that comes out because I'm so quick to notice things in other people while denying the fact that they go on inside of me. Last night, Jane and I were having a talk. We were talking about finishing projects. and I was being particularly heinous. And I hate unfinished projects, and I see them all over the house. And when Jody starts a project and it doesn't get finished, can I just tell you, I'm confessing here, and I'm so sorry for this. But I point at her and I go, why don't you ever finish something? And last night I sat on the couch after that discussion was over, and I looked at her and I went, you know what? I'm trying to apply what it is that Jesus taught me. And I think probably the problem that I have with you not finishing stuff is that I don't finish stuff. And it really bothers me that I have projects unfinished. It really bothers me that I have these ideas of things that need to happen, and then for whatever reason, life happens, or church happens, or work happens, or friends happens, or Christmas happens, or whatever, and those projects don't get done, and I sit at my computer on Monday morning, and I pull up my to-do list, and it's 100 items long, and I go, I haven't finished anything. And the thing is, it's so easy for me to see that in you. It's so easy for me to say that to her. But the problem that I have to deal with is not my wife, and it's not my kids, it's my heart. When it comes to judging, the problem we have to deal with is not the sin of other people. The problem we have to deal with is when we look in the mirror and say, I recognize in them something that's really in me. And before I can actually help them be better, before I can actually help them overcome their sin, I've got to take a long, hard look in the mirror, and I've got to say, God, you've got to fix me. God, you have to change me. And we have to honestly sing the words, God, break my heart for what breaks yours. And what is it in my life, God, that breaks yours? Fix that. See, the Bible doesn't say that there's never a time to judge. The Bible's pretty clear. There's times when judgment is exactly what needs to happen. But before we look at someone else's speck, we've got to begin removing the log in our own eye. Today, would you be willing to start the process of removing the log? Just a minute, Kyle's going to come, he's going to sing. And maybe you just need to come down here to the front and kneel and pray. There's nothing magical about this stage that like you can sit and pray exactly where you are. But can I just tell you something that I think comes from walking up here? Even though you're not out loud standing before the church and going, hey, there's an area that I'm struggling with, or hey, here's a sin issue I've got to deal with, what you do is you publicly show that, hey, I'm wrestling with something, and we can be praying for you as you come and pray. Not in a judgmental way. Not to go, oh, did you see so-and-so went up front and prayed? I wonder what's going on. It might hurt their having money trouble. Pray from an attitude of, you know what, I know where they are. I felt what they feel. Oh, God, help them. Help them recognize whatever it is you're trying to point out in their life. Help them to see the log so that they can then be the person you want them to be, so that they can then have influence in other people's lives. Would you be willing to do that today? As we sing, I want you just to imagine with me, if you will, dream with me, if you will, the implications that this truth would have on relationships in our society. The implications that this principle, if we can just apply this and make this a part of our lives, what difference would it make in race relations? What difference would it make as different socioeconomic groups get together, as people from different lifestyles get together and talk? What difference would it make between a husband and a wife if we could just wrap our heads around this? What difference would it make as we communicate with our children and with our co-workers and with our employees and with our boss? This is one of those principles that Jesus taught in 5 short verses that if we were just able to wrap our heads around it, just the people in this room could change Union City and Martin, the entire microplex. Right? The entire microplex could change. Relationships could be transformed and relationships could be healed. If before we started moving back, we looked at moving the law. When we felt the desire to pass judgment on other people, we took a long, hard look in the mirror. Would you, just with me, as I do this, would you begin to do this today? Would you begin the process of removing the law? Let me pray.